Hello. Like many of you, my daily life is practically consumed with the aftermath of the George Floyd incident. Virtually everything that I see on Facebook that isn't an advertisement is about Black Lives Matter in one way or another. Supporting the protesters, not supporting the protesters, supporting the rioting, not supporting the rioting, racist dog whistles like blacks are committing all the crime. If you say Black Lives Matter, then fix that problem. I've seen people say that if you don't say anything positive or negative about Black Lives Matter, but choose to stay out of it entirely, you're basically racist, which is incredibly stupid. And countless videos from regular people, celebrities, talking heads, and others, some of which are very good, many of which are very bad or misguided, and many of which come from people who all of a sudden think they are philosophers, but it's, just some person. Here's what I want to do in this video. I'm interested in unifying people. Black Lives Matter can't be about us versus them. That's not what the organizers say the movement is for. It's for change and education. It's not about revenge. It's about calling out injustice for the sake of calling it out. It's about activating real change. What I want to do is specifically talk about the points that counter-protesters are making. I already did a video that focused on rioting. I'm not going to try to focus on what people who are against rioting are saying, because I'm against violence. Everybody ought to be. But there are things that are being said which look and sound like they have the intention to delegitimize the protesting that is being done peacefully, which to me is unconscionable. As I said in another video about George Floyd, imagine if we weren't all protesting this horrible event. That wouldn't make any sense. America would have no soul at all if we did not say enough is enough. Here's the first point from one of the people I hate most in America, Matt Walsh. Tony Timpa was suffocated by police during an arrest. He screamed, "You're going to kill me." And they did. As he lay dead, they cracked jokes. There were no riots, little coverage. You've never heard his name because he's white. It is hard to even know where to begin with this one. One thing before we get started is that all the charges against the officers in that case were dropped. Okay, here's why this comparison is unbelievably stupid. Tony was killed in 2016. The body cam footage was only ever released in late 2019. The police did everything they could to make sure nobody saw this footage. And once it was released, it was only released to the media. They didn't publish it on Facebook or YouTube. Second of all, for all those 3 years when we didn't have the footage, the police lied. They said they found a dead body. That's what they told the victim's mother, when in reality, they killed him. So this whole time, we didn't even have a story, or at least not the correct one. Now, what do you think is going to get more attention? A video recorded by ordinary citizens, published on every major social media platform that they can, or a now 4-year-old police camera video intentionally withheld and then intentionally made as discreet as possible on its release? A similar incident that I remember well was Daniel Shaver, who was shot in a hotel hallway on January 18th, 2016. The body camera footage for that was not released until May 25th that year, but not to the public at large. It was just for the trial. The most recent footage of the incident that I could find is from the Los Angeles Times, and they uploaded that video on December 8th, 2017. Matt's got another great one, and the same sort of sentiment has been echoed by many others. On his podcast, he said you can't separate the protesters from the rioters. Countless people are intentionally or unintentionally trying to make the protests in general go away. Trump had the police tear gas and shoot rubber bullets at peaceful protesters just so he could take that stupid photo. Instead of talking about unity and peace, he said he's going to use force to create order. I have no doubt that his agenda is really to use the military or whatever other means to make all forms of protesting go away, because it's bad for his political image and this is an election year. But getting back to conflating the protesters with the rioters, here's the gist of what Walsh said. You can't separate the two because the peaceful protesters provide a cloak of invisibility and invincibility, where the rioters can get in and out and continue committing crimes with impunity. There are some elements of truth to this, but it's extremely misguided. Matt is Catholic, so I don't imagine he would take kindly to this statement. You can't separate the child molesters from the rest of the church, because when a priest is accused, they either hide them away in the Vatican, giving them immunity from prosecution, or they simply move them to another diocese and don't have to release their identity, leading to perpetual abuse. The structure of the church itself allows these things to happen. Both that statement and his statement are totally unfair, although I think mine is a lot more fair because it's an actual conspiracy, whereas rioting is just a bunch of random acts. But the most damaging part of what he is saying is that apparently the only remedy for removing the immunity which the rioters get is to completely get rid of protesting. Don't protest the murder of George Floyd. Not protesting yet another high-profile killing of an innocent person simply isn't an option, since the system has not yet changed in any meaningful way. Let's move on to the classic, black people commit the most crime, so it's their fault they are policed differently. Again, it's hard to even know where to begin. First of all, it is the definition of prejudice to judge an individual person based on the group. When these officers approached George Floyd, when any officer approaches any random person on the street, they have no reason to use aggravated tactics like that. You initiate the violence, then you scream, "Stop resisting." It makes no sense. If you see a black person and you assume violent criminal, the best thing I can say is that you are hopelessly ignorant. The worst thing is that you're just a racist. But it's worth taking a deep dive into this claim because it also helps to understand how we think about data. Another similar claim goes something like this. Blacks make up 13% of the population, but they commit 50% of the crimes and homicides. This statement is true, but not true, because it's worded in an extremely loaded way. When you say 13% of the population commits 50% of the crimes, you are indicting the entire black population. You're not separating those amongst the 13% who do commit crimes from the rest of the 13%. This is what happens when you use words recklessly. I'm not directly accusing people who say that as saying they think 100% of blacks are criminals, but it is what they are literally saying. They're not thinking about what they're saying, and it plants a virus in their heads that leads to discriminatory thinking. Most people in general are not criminals. Everybody knows that, except the president who said of Mexicans, "Some of them, I assume, are good people, but most aren't." If you want to say this kind of statement in a true sense, you'd have to say something like 1% of the population commits 50% of the crimes, or 5% of the population commits 100% of the crimes. Those aren't exact numbers, but the vast majority of people aren't criminals. When you say it like that, then you're talking about criminals and individuals, not races. Crime is extremely interesting when you take a deep look at it. Here's some statistics from a book, Talking to Strangers, by Malcolm Gladwell, which I read like 2 months ago or something like that. You go to any major city, and it turns out that 50% of the crimes are committed in around 3 to 5% of the city blocks. I'm just going to read a passage verbatim from the book. In Boston, right around the same time, another criminologist did a similar study. Half the crime in the city came from 3.6% of the city's blocks. It goes on to say that they checked in New York, Seattle, Cincinnati, Kansas City, Dallas, and they always got the exact same trends and data. They even did this in other countries. They went to Israel and found the exact same thing. So we can't say that it is uniquely a American or Black American, African American thing. Crime is connected to geography. It's not randomly distributed. Now let's look at this in terms of race, because that's what's being conflated or connected here. If we take those 3 to 5% areas where all the crime is being committed, is that where all the minorities live? Is that where all the blacks live? Well, let's look at Boston, because that was mentioned in here. Here is a crime map of Boston. We're looking for the brown and dark brown patches. It looks like the biggest problem areas are in Dorchester, Roxbury, the South End, Fenway, and Back Bay. Here's a map of demographics. The areas where mostly black people live are Hyde Park, Mattapan, and the south part of Dorchester, but they're also in the north part too. And that's it. They live all throughout the city, but they're not concentrated in areas of high crime. Now, it is true that blacks are at a higher risk for crime, but they are starting off in terrible circumstances. Socioeconomic status is a very significant predictor of crime. It's been less than one human lifetime since the Civil Rights Act. Blacks are still stuck in places that they were segregated into over multiple decades, where they couldn't get good jobs or buy houses or own property. The vast majority of blacks still live in the South, where their slave ancestors were held against their will. Physical and social mobility and progress, that doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a period of 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years. This kind of thing takes time. This is why affirmative action exists. This is why there is a welfare state. While I don't think that those systems are perfect or that they should continue indefinitely, they're important. Finally, there are people who just aren't taking the issue of police brutality with any kind of seriousness. They acknowledge it. They've condemned the officer that killed George Floyd and the 3 others who stood by, but they don't offer anything that will contribute to this sort of thing not happening anymore. When all you do is react, you don't set yourself up for any kind of progress. We don't want this to ever happen again. And if the system was capable of allowing that, then it would have stopped after Rodney King, after Eric Gardner, after Philando Castile. But it hasn't. And if we don't act, it won't. To expose the blind eye that they have towards this, I'm going to end by turning their own words against them. I've taken the transcript from a monologue that Tucker Carlson gave about rioters, but instead we're going to imagine he is talking about the police or the system in general. When he says the rioters in Minneapolis act as if they're allowed to loot and burn, instead imagine he said the police act as if they're allowed to use violent tactics. Here we go. They get to ignore the rules. They don't believe in order or fairness. Reason and process and fairness mean nothing to them. They use violence to get what they want immediately. The rioters in Minneapolis act as if they're allowed to loot and burn, and in fact, they are allowed. Nobody stops them. The authorities won't arrest them. Instead, they pander to them, flatter them, desperately try to win their love. But what exactly are you getting for your contributions to the system? The authorities clearly don't care about you. The police won't show up to save your life, literally. During election years, sweaty politicians claim to be on your side. It's a lie. They're not. They'll waste your time with hollow posturing. They'll feed you pointless symbolic victories and expect you to celebrate like you've actually won something. But when the mob comes, they're gone. You're on your own. Thanks for watching.